Protecting MMORPGs players from themselves. Let's check it out.
Whether it be an FPS, a side-scroller,
Okay.
an adventure game, an RPG, whatever. Every genre of game shares the trait.
Okay, I'll do this instead.
One of their core design pillars is that the player must be protected from themselves.
Okay.
So,
what does this mean?
What are games? How do you manipulate ones and zeros in such a way that it grabs and holds the attention of the player? The short answer is the carrot, the stick, and the treadmill, where the carrot represents the reward.
Oh my god.
And the treadmill, the obstacle course set in front of them to obtain that reward.
Essentially, isn't that just what MMOs are, though, man? It's like a never-ending treadmill. Like, you will never, it will never stop. You will never get the carrot, man. And even if you get to eat the carrot, there's gonna be a new, better carrot in front of you afterwards, right?
It is the developer's responsibility to not only create these obstacles, but also a rewarding method of overcoming them and failing to do so.
No, I know what that screenshot is, man. That's ranking. That right there is ranking.
The player may be left with an experience that is overall frustrating and unrewarding. So this is speaking pretty theoretically. So today we're going to go over a couple of examples of this exact scenario, starting with the rank 14 system in vanilla World of Warcraft.
Dude, this system is the worst, man. It is just so soul draining. It's crazy.
So when the game was first released, it came with PvP enabled, but no reward for participation.
Just fun, right?
Making strangers on the internet angry. But when patch 1.4 came out, this all changed.
Call to
as
war.
It came with the honor system, which, put simply, worked as follows. By killing other players and completing battleground objectives, players would earn honor, and how much honor they earned compared to everyone else on their faction on their server, they would climb PvP ranks. There were 14 ranks in total.
You should do it again for content. I played for 3 months straight, 18 hours average per day. For 3 months. I lost like 14-15 kilos of body weight ranking. It was the most unhealthy thing I have done to myself. I literally lost years off of my life doing it. I think I developed like actually mental problems, man. It was bad.
Starting from 1, which was private for the Alliance and Scout for Horde, going all the way up to 14, which was Grand Marshal and High Warlord, and each rank gave various rewards from gear, consumable.
This is before and after ranking, guys. Yeah, that's before and after ranking. This is when I started. That's when I finished.
Cosmetics, with the higher ranks, of course, giving higher quality rewards, climaxing with rank 14, which gave access to all of the weapons. So on a surface level, it seems like a pretty straightforward and fair system. The more you PvP, the faster you climb. But little did players know, it would become one of the most infamous crimes in MMORPG history. And one of the main reasons for that is because your competition are other players.
Yeah, bro, the amount of drama and gatekeeping and griefing that happened to this man, bro, it was so bad. We had one shaman, I think he was called One Shotted, that was ranking while we were doing it, and he gatekept literally like 50 people from ranking because he was able to farm like 40% more honor than everybody else. So normally you would stack up the group so people would have, you can see right here, they almost have the exact same amount of honor, and therefore they would get the exact same amount of RP, and it would make everybody rank a lot faster. But if you're one dude, you can literally screw over everyone else. If you can just play a lot more than everybody else and just like farm more, you can screw over so many people. It's so dumb, man.
Honor that you needed to farm was as much as how much the other players were willing to farm, which for most servers, since the rewards were so powerful, was however much you could farm by PvPing for more than 16 hours a day. Yep. There's a built-in decay in ranking.
Hot Farm was a little bitch, man. He kept sitting on the goddamn docks in Menethil Harbor when I tried to farm people for honor. And dude, he's playing like a stupid warlock. He had a Fell Hunter with like detect invis. He drank those detect invis pots, man. Holy crap, that was so annoying. I played a rogue, by the way, so you can figure why I got annoyed.
each weekly reset that the players would have to fight
Oh my
against.
lord.
And this decay is percentage based, meaning that the higher rank you climbed, the more you would have to PvP in order to make up for the increased decay. This would in turn also create a sunk cost fallacy, where if the player were to stop PvPing at any point, they would watch months and months of progress vanish before their very eyes. So naturally, because the competition was so fierce and there was so much at stake, cheating would become rampant. Many players would resort to account sharing to keep up a 24/7 farm. Opposing teams would collude with each other and intentionally try to queue up against one another through third-party voice programs.
Like, what's the point, man?
TeamSpeak or Ventrilo, and then trade wins in order to get a leg up on the competition against the other teams on their server. It felt like you were competing more against your own faction than you were the enemy, because you essentially were. Collusion also took form in other ways. In an effort to reduce the amount of honor that everyone on the server had to farm, server communities would agree to farm to a certain amount, just enough to outpace uncooperative outside parties, and then stop, and taking a rotation of who could farm the most and at what point. The amount of ranking points earned were determined by what bracket you were in. This was an invisible system not shown to the players, but people have figured it out over time. And the amount of space per bracket increased the more people on your server of your faction were PvPing. So for example here, these aren't real numbers, but for 1,000 active PvPers, maybe there were 2 slots in bracket 1, which awards the highest amount of ranking points possible. And if there were 2,000 active PvPers, maybe there were 4 slots instead. So because of this, players would make what are known as pool parties, where one player makes a low-level character near a graveyard, and
this was the most stupid shit in the world, man.
Another higher level of the opposite faction continuously kills that player as a spirit res over and over. And
so essentially, you would literally like make level 1 characters and kill level 1s to increase the pool size so more people could rank. And this was mandatory to do if you were in a pool and you were ranking. You had to do this on 10 characters, or like 8 or 9 or whatever, how many you could. So dumb.
The rest of the PvP community makes level 1 characters to group up with until they get 25 honor kills, which is the minimum to be counted as an active PvPer for that week.
And if you didn't do it, they would shut you out of the group and they would farm more honor than you, and you would not get into any BGs, you would not get any premates, you would just be shunned out.
They reach 25, they delete that level 1 character, make another one.
It's crazy.
Over and over for hours and hours to artificially inflate the amount of active PvPers for that week, and therefore the amount of bracket slots, so more people could get more ranking points. Participation in these pool parties is mandatory, as if you skipped out, you wouldn't be given high-level bracket slots.
There
you
it
would
is.
be blacklisted by the PvP community. Infighting, drama, and sabotage would also be common. In the game at this point, there were dishonorable kills. In order to prevent players from camping critical low-level questing NPCs, Blizzard made it such that killing these NPCs earned a dishonorable kill, which immediately decayed a player's rank. And if this happened at the higher ranks, weeks of progress could be lost in a single moment. And of course, since players were competing against each other more than they were the enemy faction, it would become a weapon of sabotage. Just one example here. In the 2019 line of Classic on the Fairlina server, there's a person who refused to abide by the community-run brackets. And they simply farmed as much honor as possible. And in retaliation, someone socially engineered this person for months, pretending to be their friend and gaining their trust, to invite them into a group in order to PvP with them. So this bracket breaker happened to be queuing up at the Alliance Warsong Gulch entrance in Ashenvale, and he was in a battleground. So this fake friend got into a group to queue up with him for the next game. He gathered several civilians from the nearby low-level Horde questing hub, and as soon as the bracket breaker's battleground ended and he loaded into Ashenvale, his so-called friend killed several civilians at once, immediately deranking them a few times over.
That person lost like weeks of progress. It doesn't sound like that much, but if you derank a few times, that's weeks that you have to farm extra. Weeks of playing 18 hours per day extra. That's fucking nuts, dude. People are insane, man. We have also heard people like stories from people in like EVE Online and like, you know, Tiny Violin, all that stuff. It's insane.
This troll would prove to be quite effective, as the bracket breaker at that point simply quit entirely.
Yep.
As weeks of 12 hours a day grinding was lost in an instant.
Yep.
So despite the intensity of this grind, the armor and weapons that were offered were so powerful, both for PvP and PvE, many couldn't help but continue to grind. The lower barrier of entry into the more casual ranks, combined with the weekly decay, served as a very powerful sunken cost fallacy.
And the thing is, man, once you finally get those weapons, you don't even want to play anymore. Because you do, like, what's the, like, you've played so much, you're so burned out afterwards. It's like, it's so bad.
Took the player base captive and pushed them to grind more and more.
Yeah, you're burned out.
All of the energy expended and sacrifices made thus far be for nothing. So naturally, what happened, you would burn people out. They would come to hate an activity they used to love. They would come to hate the players that they engaged in that activity with. And what
not necessarily,
seems like such an innocent and simple system at this point had spiraled out of control into cheating, unhealthy playtime, burnout, social engineering, doxing, and yes, even death threats, as is standard with the classic.
I did get some of those as well.
PvP community. So it stands today as one of the prime examples of the developers creating.
Not necessarily death threats, but I just got people hope that, you know, DM'd me that they hoped I died, right, and my family died and stuff because I ganked them in Minathil Harbor.
System that fails completely in protecting the players from themselves. For our next example, we enter the world of Star Wars Galaxies, released in 2003. This would be Star Wars' first dive into the MMO genre, which was followed by the Old Republic in 2012. And in the game's initial version, which is known as the pre-combat upgrade, or pre-CU for short, the game had a profession system, which would total 32 by release, split up into 6 basic professions that you could pick at character creation.
What?
And depending on which ones you specialized in, they led to 26 advanced professions,
26?
Which the players could mix and match in a pretty unrestricted way, such as a rifleman with healing skills, or a tailor who strips on the side. As for the professions themselves, they would be loosely separated into 3 major roles, which were combat, support, and crafting. Combat professions would range in complexity, the more straightforward being what you would expect from Star Wars, ranged classes using blasters, and melee with a variety of different weapon types.
Interesting.
And as for the more complex, an example would be the creature handler, which was designed entirely around taming creatures found in the wild and having them fight.
Okay, that's actually kind of dope though. What the fuck? So you could like tame like all those giga monsters?
There were also bounty hunters who
It's like a hunter on steroids.
Unique ability to track down both NPC and player Jedi through the use of droids that would pinpoint their location no matter where they were hiding. As for the supportive professions, this would be healers like doctors who could buff and heal others. There were also dancers and musicians who would also buff people in cantinas. You had smugglers who could slice weapons, which would increase their damage. And they could also open locked containers, or maybe you have a merchant who is more based around commerce, as they would gain the ability to create their own vendors to sell items to other players.
Dude, MMOs are really just like a second life. Like, it's crazy. It's literally like living like a second life. There's so much complexity to these games.
Even while they were offline.
I don't think this is for Tor. I think this was a Star Wars Galaxies?
Or perhaps a squad leader, which was designed entirely around buffing other players. And this would even extend to cosmetics, such as the image designer, who would be able to alter the appearance of another player.
Oh, wait,
As
what?
for crafters, there were armor smiths and weaponsmiths.
Wait, you could do that for them?
Who could make armor and weapons from monster parts. A tailor would make clothes, which were both cosmetic and functional. Droid engineers could make medical droids to boost doctor buffs, or those tracking droids for bounty hunters, and bioengineers played God and created creatures for the creature handlers to tame, and so on. The point is that the game had one of the most rich and diverse class systems ever.
Yeah, that's
made.
crazy.
But there was an issue, because there's one more that I haven't mentioned, and that's the most coveted of all.
Okay.
The Jedi, which the game would advertise quite heavily. But the only problem
I mean, dude, that's the main thing, man. If you play Star Wars, it's like Jedi, man. You want to be that or a Sith, right?
is nobody really knew how to unlock it yet.
Oh.
Of course, within the story of Star Wars, Jedi were rare and powerful, so making them
secret.
in line with these other combat professions in order to maintain some semblance of balance didn't really make sense. So in order to circumvent this, they had to make them extremely rare.
Oh no.
To make them extremely rare, they had to make them extremely grindy.
Oh
it
no.
worked as follows. You had to master 5 professions, selected randomly per player, and you unlocked a Force-sensitive character slot, which allowed you to create the Jedi. Galaxies was a game with pretty sparse endgame content, so once players fully finished their templates, some would struggle to find things to do.
They're just done.
So as a result, after having reached their maximum power level, most were pretty naturally guided towards this next level of advancement, the Jedi. So to
but once you got it, you just quit. Like, what's the point? If there's nothing to do, then you just quit the game.
Which professions they needed to master, the players had to loot these extremely rare holocron items off of powerful enemies, which upon use would just directly tell them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the end game is to sit in town and flex then, right? That's it.
Which one to master, but it would only work for the first 4, as the 5th would be silent, only sharing a message that the ancients' knowledge of the Force will no longer assist them in their journey, and they must continue seeking it on their own. So because of this, the optimal strategy then became to pray and master them all in an order ascending from easiest and cheapest to hardest and most expensive, and with 32
and it could be any one of those.
And with 32 professions total, the chances of guessing the correct one early were very low.
Yikes.
MMOs, especially during these early years, shared some pretty common
traits. That's fucked.
They were all extremely grindy and time-consuming.
Yeah.
Whereas today the industry has shifted more towards activities that reset on daily and weekly timers to keep players busy. Back then,
I guess that's the new dopamine thing, right? You log in, you do your daily stuff, and then you can get it done.
Instead relied on extremely long and tedious grinds.
That's crazy, though.
Keep the players with something to do, and therefore subscribed. But this was a grind that would be so intense that it just chased people
too
away,
much,
and people started quitting en masse.
I think that's a big reason why a lot of people... It's like MMOs are like a hate or love kind of thing, right? Some people love the grind, some people love having like something to do, but I think for a lot of people, it's just too much, right? It's like they don't want to do that shit. I prefer the grind. I log in, do dailies, log out, and then I cry. Oh.
But for those who remained, much like the rank 14 system, they would be unable to resist the grind.
Yeah.
As they would start dropping professions that they actually enjoyed and identified with.
To get into the grind.
Just grinded out whatever the magic 8 ball told them to. It didn't matter how much they disliked the profession. Bounty hunters were now dancing in cantinas. Doctors had started to become politicians, and creature handlers were chopping up their pets to use as ingredients to make food.
Yeah, true, Petty.
They cast aside their own enjoyment of what was supposed to be a fun journey in exchange for this hypnotizing Jedi, and they went through any means necessary, and
kind of sucks
it
in
was
a
for
way.
this reason, much like the rank 14 system, that this Jedi system would be a failure, as the players had begun to sabotage their own experience and burn themselves out in the process.
I mean, there should be grinds, there should be like stuff you can work towards, but there also should be a limit to it, right? For sure. Imagine working toward a profession only to change it to a dancer. Yeah, there should be some grinding. Exactly.
The developers failed to protect the players from themselves. The allure of the carrot far outpaced the reward of the treadmill.
Yeah.
Although these are some pretty extreme examples, failing to follow through with this philosophy can be found in all corners of these games, particularly within daily and weekly activities. Although they're effective at giving players reasons to keep coming back, they can also do damage, as the reasons for these players coming back isn't necessarily because it's fun and rewarding.
Because you have to do it.
Rather, it's punishing if they refuse to do them. If they're closely intertwined with the game's form of character progression.
What was this called? Islands or whatever?
And unfun, the player base will still participate. Examples of this would be the Tower of Torghast in Shadowlands, which is generally looked back at with disdain. But
I don't think Torghast was that bad. I know it gets a lot of hate. I think the reason why Torghast was so shit was because it became really like mandatory. I actually quite enjoyed Torghast. I just didn't like that it was mandatory. Like you had to grind Torghast, right? It became Choreghast instead.
Regardless of that, the entirety of the player base participated in it many
If
times.
it was more like a challenge mode or something like that, I think a lot of people would receive it a lot better. It was better at the start, but later on it was better. We were all done with it. Yeah.
It's because it was required to get the powerful legendary affixes. And also BFA is another period within the game's history where Blizzard was seen to over-rely on daily and weekly timers to the benefit of engagement metrics, but to the detriment of actual player experience. Protecting players from themselves is a battle that's been raging on since the dawn of video games, and it continues today, most prolifically within the MMORPG genre, and it stands today as one of the biggest challenges that developers face.
Yeah.
Like the video if you liked it, because
it was interesting.
Next one. Peace.
I think it is true though, man. There has to be limits to some of those grinds, because at some point it reaches a point where it's just not fun anymore, right? And it's just, you're just grinding it to grind it. It becomes unhealthy, right? That's just really how it goes. It's also why it's really hard to try to do like these kind of games really good, I guess, MMOs, because you gotta find that sweet spot, man. You have to find that sweet spot.